Oh, don't. See these new ones?
Are they not the same as the
It's-
ones we have?
Doesn't seem to like signing on to the internet in here. Although it says that it's on the internet.
Yeah, I stick to a Mac.
Probably a better option.
Reliability. Yeah.
Why are they not?
Yeah, that's not a signal for it.
They're not.
I'm really struggling to see how Landlord over the next
I know. I see.
between funerals and events and work.
I know.
It's just too much.
I know,
It's just
because-
not possible.
I went out just with Michelle and all at lunchtime. I didn't want to go because I wanted to have a meal, so there was a few of us there.
We're in open session.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, members, and good morning. Moidjin Moy agus to Fáilte Roamh to our meeting here this morning of the Committee for Communities. I welcome all members to the meeting and confirm that we have a quorum and are now started in open session. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off? Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. No recordings or photographs are to be taken. Can I remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch your mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly and in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of cameras and sensitivity of the microphones when throughout the meeting. Finally, I'd remind all members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any items under discussion today. I will declare in relation to, we're dealing with some issues around the private landlord scheme, and I have a property which I get a rental income on, so I declare that. Andy?
James, Chair.
Yep, thank you. Any other interest, members? No, thank you. Okay, members, moving on then to apologies. Clerk, please.
Melissa, Mickey.
Yep, thank you. Members aware of any other apologies? Oh, thank you. Okay then, members, moving on, there's nothing really in Chair's business, so I'll go straight to agenda item 3 there, which is the draft minutes. I refer you to the draft minutes of the meeting on 7th of November, which are page 6 of your pack. Are members content to agree the minutes of 7th November as drafted?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, Clerk, yep. Agenda item 4 then, members, matters arising. So members, at page 23 there's a reply from the Housing Executive in relation to a committee request to provide guidance for applicants, contractors and architects to support the contractor appointment stage as part of the warranted builder scheme change process to all MLA offices. The reply states that guidance to implement this new policy has been prepared for applicants, architects and contractors, and a copy is available on the Housing Executive website. The Housing Executive is also currently making the necessary arrangements to have the guidance issued to all MLAs. So are members content to note?
Yep.
Yep. At page 87, members, there's a departmental reply on the sports funding announcement following Olympic and Paralympic success. Athletes have been asked to nominate projects in the north close to their heart or in their community for capital funding. Athletes are not limited to their own clubs and can nominate multiple clubs within the maximum total. The award is based on the medal won. The 6 athletes were contacted prior to the Paris Celebration event, and Sport NI is working together with the athletes to identify suitable projects. The Minister has instructed his officials to consider a longer-term programme with a wider reach across sport to broaden the ability of people from the north to compete at elite level. The Department's strategy to support Olympians and Paralympians in the future is set out under the theme Promoting Excellence in Sport in Active Living, the Sport and Physical Activity Strategy for Northern Ireland. Sport NI has advised that it is currently investing in high-quality modern facilities through its multi-facility fund, which seeks to develop sports hubs across the north. The fund has a value of 6.75 million and is working with district councils and sports clubs to deliver 5 projects. So, any comments, members? Go ahead, Ciara.
I suppose just 2 questions. One is in relation to the multi-facility fund. I don't know, is it publicly available what 5 venues are going forward
Not
with
sure, I can
councils?
check.
Would that be possible to have? And then I think it's really, it's great to know that they are currently working to update the assessment of existing facility provision across the north. Is there a possibility we could have a timeline on that? It would be useful to know.
Updating of facilities.
Yeah.
And also, in relation to the 100,000 that was allocated, I'm glad to see that there is an indication that there may be some support from Sport NI working with the athletes, because to me it could, almost place them in a wee bit of an awkward position. And I would like to know how that funding is going to be kind of assessed in terms of any outcomes from it, as to whether or not, what it achieved. And also, I suppose, it's laudable to support those that were successful. We have to, I suppose, try to get behind the dashboard a wee bit in terms of the other sports where we could have or maybe should have done better. And I'm thinking boxing. I met young Jude Gallagher on the way home that night, actually, from the event. And I know there's been cuts to their funding. So I'm wondering what else there is, underlying that in terms of the assessment of the Olympics and how we then build upon that success and ensure that we have our athletes are able to compete at competitive levels come the next time around. So I have Morris, then Andy.
I'll be brief, Chair. Just following on from Ciara's question, could that information be disseminated amongst the rest of the committee once it's acquired? Because I find it very, very helpful going forward. The other thing is, I'm a great believer in facilities. Facilities grow sport, and if you don't have the facilities, you can't grow athletes. So I'd be keen to see that the bulk of this funding is extended to the rural areas as opposed to the inner city areas, because it's the rural areas that are bereft of any kind of facilities, and I'd be keen to see how this rolls out going forward.
Yeah. Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And just building on your point, and firstly, maybe declaring interest as somebody who's involved in disability sport. But could we maybe write to the two bodies just to see? And it's fantastic, in those sports where we went on to achieve success. But what are they doing to promote and build up other sports where we haven't been able to be represented or achieve success?
Yeah, I think so, Sean.
Yeah.
I think that's and members agreed. I think with that point. Sure.
Yeah, I think that was one of my general concerns whenever we first had Sport NI in, that there's obviously a focus on elite, and that's great. But as we all know, and as Morris pointed out, you don't, without that grassroots, without the facilities, without the basics, without the structure and the infrastructure surrounding those sports, we aren't going to get to compete at an elite level. So what's actually happening there in the grassroots kind of on that level for me is how we then invest in those elite athletes down the line. So I think that was my concern whenever we had Sport NI, and whenever I heard about this £100,000, I worried about the athletes that were being chosen, because it does put them in a difficult position. Having been someone who had to allocate funding in a previous job, it's a really difficult thing, especially when there is so much need. So I suppose getting to understand what's going on behind the scenes, and is there support then for those athletes as they pick, and as they do they have a criteria for how they're going to allot that money? I think would be really, really good to understand, and just how will that impact be monitored, because I think that's the key thing here for all of us, is what is the impact of public money and public expenditure? I think that always has to come back for me.
Yeah, and I have to say, and I was really struck actually at the recent Grassroots Soccer Awards in terms of the growth of grassroots soccer around the inclusive agenda. Disability teams, girls teams, all of that is really, really impressive, and there's a real strong sense of volunteers all coming from really, really good night, and that you would want to get that out broadly, because the more participation you get, the more you'll be fishing out of a bigger pool for athletes, as in all sports as time goes on. So getting people involved is really key. And I'm wondering, so there's a number of things have been sort of flagged here, but there's no real detail around it. I wonder, do we need to maybe consider getting Sport NI in to get or is it Sport NI, or who do we need to maybe speak to and to get a bit more detail on some of these?
Just one thing is, Sean kind of highlighted the fact that there's a bit uncomfortable regarding the process, and particularly in relation to the position that the individual elite athletes are in. So, and then it's obviously the impact of the decisions that are made. Was there a risk assessment done on the process in relation to how money is decided upon and allocated. Because it isn't one that I would be familiar with, and I've spent many years in funding application processes and stuff like that, and marking and stuff. So it's an unusual way. I haven't been aware that it's been done before. There may be precedents within the department. So it's just really, was there a risk assessment done on the process?
And I think that's particularly important in the context of the part of the play, say the ministers and circular officials to consider a longer term programme, and you'd wonder, is that going to be done on a similar basis or a different basis? So you'd want to ensure there is rigour.
Yes, just ensure it's a robust methodology in the use of
both in the
disseminating
allocation and
funding.
the follow-up and the assessment. Yeah, I think there's certainly an issue around that. Maurice, were you looking in again?
No, just to you know, one of the sports that we have very, very few facilities for is athletics, you know, in the rural areas. So, you know, if you have the facilities outside of the main cities, what you do is you create a platform for grassroots development, which then can move up to the elite sections within the cities, etc., etc. So, you know, it's important that we have facilities at grassroots level to get people interested in sport and take it from there. All sports.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think. Well, I wonder, maybe should we try to schedule at some point in a briefing of some kind, or who do Clerk, do you
Well,
think?
I think based on the letter, we should write to the Sport NI and ask the questions in terms of the process and the support being provided to athletes, measurement of impact, and whether there was any risk assessment process put in place in terms of allocation of the funds, and then see what comes back in writing.
Members, that sounds solid enough. Yeah.
Can I just double check? I was just trying to double check here. Paralympians didn't win medals, so they don't get this additional recognition. And to be honest, for some, even getting there has been a fantastic achievement. I'm just wondering, is there anything else that's going to encourage our Paralympians and, you know, sports for disabilities?
Yeah, and it was actually raised at the event on the night by some of the athletes that their families even are struggling to maintain their involvement given the commitment that there is in it. So I think there is an issue specifically around that we should
As
include.
Ciara was saying, you know, a quality impact assessment, you know, it's we do want to recognise people who won medals. My goodness, they are our champions in sport, but let's spread the opportunities around. Yeah.
And target it effectively and deal with to provide that platform for them in the best way possible. Okay, thank you, members. So we'll seek the responses on that and take it from there. So page 91 then, members, is a departmental reply on gambling regulation. Information on gambling related activities that are prohibited in the North and who is responsible for enforcement of prohibitions is in the public domain. Details are set out in the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Order 1985 and in relevant parts of the Department's existing published online guidance. The 1985 order specifically states that any person may object to the grant, renewal, transfer, etc. of gambling licences, permits, certificates, etc. The Department is currently in discussion with the Advertising Standards Authority about plans to raise the public awareness here of the ASA's role and how individuals can complain about any form of gambling advertising that they may consider inappropriate. I would remind members that the Department is scheduled to brief us in relation to gambling reform at our next committee meeting on the 21st of November. So, any comment or content to note, members? Go ahead, Kelly.
I think, to be honest, what we have in place for physical gambling facilities in Northern Ireland is fairly robust given the last piece of legislation that went through. To be honest, quite a lot of the complaints that are coming through are online. You know, what's happening with the prize guys and this, that and the other thing that happens online and the online gambling. I'm not sure if the department is working with the equivalent in Westminster on that, but it's just when they come to us if we could understand what they are doing with the online sphere.
Yeah, and in particular in relation to that online space, and I actually did attend, myself and the clerk attended the Ofcom did a board meeting here recently, and we spoke to a number of people, I have to say, but it's very hard to figure out who is monitoring that gap, and particularly young people online gambling, and a lot of the advertising, and there are probably issues for ASA as well, but there's a lot of the advertising is aimed at young people and aimed at women on during the day sometimes, a lot of the advertising.
I think the last time the committee had looked at this legislation, it came to light that it's not just straightforward place a bet For instance, there are children's games that have in it, if you spend money, you'll get this prize, you know, and then you're going on to play the rest of your game. That all comes under this remit. So it's one of those things that seems to be, because they're based outside of Northern Ireland or outside of the UK, we can do nothing about, but we need to do something because they're targeting our children.
And the harm is very much based here.
Yeah.
The harm, and they are very real and very, very ongoing and very concerning. So I think that remains a concern. It's useful that we have them coming next week, and I think there'll be an opportunity to get some of those questions aired and answers on that. Okay, members, then at page 93, there's a reply from the department on the Historic Buildings Council report. It states that the department is aware that many of the challenges facing the historic environment and continues to provide as much help and assistance as it can in regard to the issues raised, given serious funding challenges. It goes on to state that these challenges make the case for a long-term heritage, culture and creativity strategy which the department aims to produce in the new year. So I suppose even just reading that, you know, does prompt with me, I'm wondering about a heritage, culture and creativity. Do they all fit as neatly in the strategy? So all important issues, but I'm just not 100% convinced that they neatly fit into a single strategy. So I'm wondering about Kelly and then Sean.
Yeah, I was just going to say the series of recommendations, what I'd like to hear from, even in written format from the department, is what they're actually going to do with any of those recommendations. If they could traffic light them, you know, to see what is or isn't going to happen. My concern is that the department's division doesn't have enough money to take legal action where there are historic buildings that are falling into disrepair, in order to ensure that, say, private owners of them will take action to save them. I know we've heard from the thatching people, you know, about how budgets are set and how the grants come out and they don't meet with their timetable. That's another issue. It's processes of the division and how they issue access to funding. So if even we could get something in writing about red light or traffic light and the recommendations and how they're going to be dealt with, what's their approach with regards to the monitoring of historic buildings and the legal process? Have they got enough money to be able to take challenges? And then finally, it's the timetabling of the division's release of money. Has that been reviewed to take into consideration? It's a bit like cricket with sport money. You know, it comes out too late for them to be able to enjoy. For thatchers, bringing the money out so they have to thatch in November makes no sense because the materials aren't there then. So it's just that review, please.
Yeah. Sean?
Yeah, no, and I would echo some of your concerns there, Chair, in terms of they are such broad. Each is such a broad topic in its own right, that it would be useful, I think, to hear a bit more. And I think the historic environment nearly falls down the pecking order in that sense as well, in terms of both the financial aspect but also what we hear. And as Kelly said, you know, we hear from elements of it, but again, because it's such a broad topic, I was going to suggest later on to maybe look at getting to schedule in a time for, you know, Emer Morelli and Ian Greenway and to come in and speak about culture and arts. But it might be really useful to have Paul Price, if he's still the person over the historic environment, to maybe just come in as a departmental briefing on that entire strand, because I think that is a really important piece of work that maybe hasn't had quite as much attention from the committee.
Yeah, and especially based off the meeting that we did with Equity on the creativity end of it, like, and you know, you just would be concerned that you could see a really good creativity work, but then the heritage thing would become a lesser piece. It's also like, while culture and creativity are definitely connected, when you think about it, creativity is about creating the next part of so they don't necessarily fit. So I think if there is an overall strategy, it'll have to be very clear within the strategy how each of those strands are being supported rather than just making an amalgam of them, because I don't think...
You also have libraries and museums in there as well, which doesn't fit neatly into the either culture, creativity or the historic environment. So there are quite a few strands, I think, that do need attention and a very specific engagement piece on their own, and the underlying policy piece as well. So they are very succinct and separate, but it would, I think, just be really useful to understand, I suppose, where the focus of the department is and where that division is kind of sitting in terms of each of those.
Just one wee point, and it's very, very brief. In my experience working with them, they would prefer a building to fall down rather than have the owner of it renovate it. So that's something maybe we could take up as well. You know, we're losing valuable buildings right across Northern Ireland because of their stance with no, don't touch it. You know.
Yeah, valid point too. Yeah. Okay, thanks members. We'll be coming back to that then. I have no doubt. Clerk, are you
We'll ask for a briefing and raise those specific points for addressing in the briefing. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. At page 95 then, members, there's a departmental reply to committee queries on the retention of employees entering employment through the Job Start 16 to 24 scheme, so that's the younger scheme, which has been now ended. The target for sustained employment is 65%. At 30 September, 736 young people have completed this opportunity, achieving 68% sustaining employment with either their Job Start employer or an alternative. An exercise to ascertain the number of participants who remain in employment 30 weeks after the end of their Job Start opportunity commenced on 14th of October this year. Final findings will be available from July 2025, 13 weeks after the last person has left the scheme, and participant feedback is provided at Annex A. And I want to say just before I come to Ciara, the feedback is exceptionally good, and for me underlines the pity that this scheme is no longer supported for younger people. And I absolutely agree that it's good for that 50 plus cohort as well. But I would be really keen just to urge the department to continue working to see if it's possible to get funding back into that younger end of the Job Start scheme. Ciara?
I would just obviously want to commend the department on the success of it. Fantastic to see 68% still in work after 13 weeks. And I suppose it's just in relation to the final findings that they're hoping to publish in July 25. Like most European programmes, the assessment would be 6 months retention in work rather than 13 weeks, you know, and that's kind of the standard practice. So it would be really useful. It's just maybe just a recommendation going back to the department that in doing the review, is it possible for those that would already be post 6 months, they maybe do a follow-up there. But I think it'd be really, really good to see what the percentage is there post 6 months. And likewise, of the 32% that aren't, I'm really interested in finding out why, because we always need to be looking at improving. And those that, for whatever reason, what were the reasons that they're still not in employment, that would be really useful to know moving forward. So it's really just making recommendations back to the department in relation to their final findings in July. If they could look at those areas as well over the next 6 months would be great.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to follow on what Ciara's saying, you know, it looks very impressive, but does it look impressive at 9 months and a year after the course? Again, like Ciara, I just have a little bit of a concern. I know it was cast up to all parties actually during previous negotiations by the Treasury to say, you know, you have all these wonderful schemes, why have you got such a high percentage of not in employment or learning? So I think that there's something there. Now, I appreciate that the department has said that they don't keep track of these young people after they have completed their course, but they have connections with the employers, you know, the people who did the Job Start programmes. So why can't they follow up with them to find out, is that young person still with you, or if they're not? It's just that sort of upkeep on it. We want to make sure that it's value for money for the public purse. Is it value for money a year later? I just don't know. Are we recycling people back into schemes? And yes, I to reiterate what you've said, the scheme does appear to have worked very well for those that have been in it. I hope they are in, you know, after the 13 weeks that they are still in employment. But unless we commit to having investment in this type of scheme, we're not going to help those 16 to 24-year-olds. So it's to put support behind the Minister from the committee to say that we absolutely would support any calls that he has to get more money for the Job Start scheme.
Yeah. Ryan?
Yeah. Well, it's good to see the positive feedback from participants, and yes, we'll be interested to see after the 13 weeks the longer term outcome. It is a concern. I don't think we've heard back from the Westminster Department about for economic inactivity under Shared Prosperity Fund. I think we were writing, weren't we, about likes of Belfast Works Connect to ask where they.
We did receive a reply.
Did we get that back?
It was in last week. Yeah, I'll double check that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I missed that. But just for that line of work is very important. That support, just giving that extra support to people to help them get into employment where they've been out of work for a while. Because yes, a lot of these schemes are time limited. Right, well, I'll check up that correspondence then.
I'll take it out and double check we're talking about the same thing.
Okay, it was about the shared prosperity funding, which was coming to at the end of this financial year, and then there was I think
It was a reduction.
it was reduced down to 60%. I think
Yeah.
funding, and we were asking.
What was the impact here in the north?
Okay, maybe I've missed that then. We're just knowing where that's going to.
I don't recall it being in the pack either, to be honest.
Sorry,
I don't recall.
because I think we only requested it last week.
I think we only requested it last week.
We were going to ask.
Further question, was it?
Well,
was
if,
it further?
if they can tell us which groups the funding's going to, because
The
it's
further letter went to the department.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. The further
Just-
letter went to the
That was only
department.
sent
You're right.
last week.
Yeah, I think that was only just sent.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, there's one of the things out of this that I think that we need to think about across departments. So, for instance, the Job Start scheme enables someone to have the experience. It would be very useful to find out from the department when they're doing, the final findings, if they can confirm what jumped out from this programme about people entering the workforce. What was it that they needed support with? And are they actually going to take those findings along with access to employment in their own department and with the Department for the Economy to look at apprenticeship schemes or whatever it is, to see that where those gaps have been identified, that we're doing something, even with the Department for Education, about bringing through those skills for these people. So I want to see, if we can ask the department, are they going to include in their final findings the learnings from it and what actions will be taken, even if it's outside of the Department for Communities, with others, to ensure that we're able to help people and learn from this and maybe upskill some young people, recognising that, so that they don't have to go into a Job Start scheme because they have those skills before they're looking for work.
Yep, important learning there to be disseminated as appropriate. Okay, Clark, are you content with it? Members, then at page 100, there's a reply on the NI resettlement scheme, which states that the schemes have not themselves closed but will continue under the stewardship of the Executive Office. The Department has been keen to share lessons learned during this process and will continue to work with the Executive Office in respect of these aspects of refugee resettlement that fall within the Department's area of responsibility. Members content to note?
It was just to say, with it moving into the Executive Office and the Executive Office having responsibility for good relations and the anti-racism piece, it would be good to, when we're doing our social strategies, to maybe keep in contact at that time with the Executive Office to ensure that they're carrying that through with through the scheme, with resettlement scheme with people. Yeah.
Okay, members, page 102, there's a department reply on the Disabled Facilities Grant and Home Improvement Grants. The reply states that how this available funding is divided out across the various available grants is an operational matter for the Housing Executive. The total budget awarded to the Housing Executive for these grants for the 2024 to 25 financial year is £14.751 million. Each grant application has a dedicated case officer who can provide an update to an applicant or their named representative on their application status at any time. The Housing Executive is unable to provide a specific timeline for each applicant when it comes to processing and completing an application for grant aid. The Housing Executive always seeks to improve and streamline the grant process, and since March 22 they have reduced processing days by over 30% and continue to monitor and improve where possible. Members, any comment?
I suppose one of the comments, if they can provide that information, I know they're monitored since 2022, well, the detailed information should be able to quite easily press a button and give you that information. I found it quite vague, the response, and particularly into relation to the budget, because we're well aware, the budget is halved, and I know from my constituency and tenants that are really, really concerned regarding their current applications that have been submitted because of the budget cuts. So I know, they've mentioned that they've got the 2 core grants, they've mentioned their budget, but I would have loved to see what are the issues in relation to it. I just found the letter very, very vague, and it actually brought more questions to me than answers. So I would ask if there could be more detailed information provided in relation to, if it can be done on the table, as the many application forms, the budget requested, the budget they have, the deficit, because that's what we're here about. I want to see what is a huge deficit, because it's getting reflected in my office with tenants, and I think it's critically important that people are supported to remain in their homes. So it's a key priority for us, and it's common sense in relation to, we have a crisis in relation to homelessness, we have a lack of social homes, so particularly for those that are currently in their private homes, this is a key priority. So it's just, I would prefer to have more detailed information. So I just want to put it on record. I just thought it was very, very vague, and I would like to have more detailed information on the current situation facing tenants in relation to the demand for repair grants, the disability grants, but also the discretionary grants as well.
Thank you, Kelly.
I was just going to say it would be quite useful to actually find out, especially for the Disabled Facilities Grant, how many people applied and then how many people withdraw from the process after having the grant awarded. Because I'm finding that there's quite a lot of people just cannot work with the process. When you're asking somebody who is already having difficulties because of their disability and living in an inappropriate home, and that's why they've applied, to become the foreman and the project officer for these grants is the breaking point for a lot of people. And the fact that without that foreman type or project officer type of oversight, which we know is provided by third party bodies, I have met so many people with disabilities who have said it was the worst thing that they'd ever applied for. And even if they successfully completed and got a new bathroom or downstairs facilities or whatever, they'd wished they'd never gone through it. It broke their hearts for years. So it's how many people get the awards and then pull out of it, and also the length of time that it takes for the awards from the time that it's awarded until the final completion. Because it can vary from, I have one case that it was up to 6 years that a family had to live without an appropriate accommodation while this was going through.
Yeah, and I have to say, those are pretty basic pieces of information that flow through the department's hands, and there has been a bit of a trend around answers being vague and around even, difficulty accessing some of the information. And the question I would have in my mind is, if the department, let alone forgetting about us asking for the information, if the department don't have the information readily to hand, how do they understand what they're doing right and wrong in a lot of these schemes, or where a scheme is going wrong or is not delivering the outcomes that would be required?
Chair, it's very important that while the department keep on saying all these things are operational matters for the housing executive, it's the department gives them the money. So if they can't monitor how this is being spent or what it's being spent on, then questions have to be asked about accountability of the department on that one. I don't cut this with arm's length bodies are still the responsibility of departments.
Yep, absolutely. So a number of questions there. Have you the detail on that?
Yep,
You're
so we're
content?
seeking more detailed information to include the number of applications being made under each of the repair facilities grant, the different schemes, what the applications are for, so what is being requested, the level of the deficit against what is being able to be met, the numbers who withdraw having been made appropriate for an award, and then the average length of time it's taken from the award to final completion.
Just note one other thing. Obviously, they're doing a consultation process that commenced it. Could we ask, have they been in contact and have they liaised or have they received reports from Shelter and Radius, who provide the support for tenants going through the Disability Facilities Grant? Because it'd be useful if there has been correspondence there, what has been the outcome of that?
Shelter and Radius.
Yeah.
Sure, can I just add to that as well? And of those applicants, how many of them has raised issues and what those issues were? Because similarly to other members, I'm being contacted by individuals raising a whole plethora of issues and highlighting that they don't feel that they're receiving the wide range of support in order to enable them to manage this, and actually they're being left, as other members have said previously, with homes that were worse than what they had before they embarked on this journey.
Thank you. I was content with all of that. Yep, thank you. Page 105 then, members, there's a departmental reply on the progress of an Irish language strategy. And there is another item at 4.17, which is page 119, and it probably will be useful to take both those together as they're quite closely related. So the first item is a response to our more recent request for an update. And that reply states that the cross-departmental working group is considering the Irish Language Co-Design Group's strategy action plan. In relation to the update on the appointment of an Irish Language Commissioner, that's a matter for TEO. Moving to item 4.17, which is page 119 of the pack then, members, there's a reply following the request from last week's meeting for information on membership of the cross-departmental working group for the Ulster Scots Language, Heritage and Culture Strategy and the Irish Language Strategy. Membership, we are told, is made up of senior officials across government departments except for the Department of Health. So they point out that a previous departmental response was sent in April and they have reattached that response, and that sets out some additional information. Now, before I go to Sian, I know as indicated, I just want to say that a committee asking for a further update 7 months on from a letter being issued is absolutely fundamental to our work and in no way an imposition. And we clearly want to know what is happening with these strategies along with a number of other strategies. And I just think that's totally inappropriate, to be quite honest, and I am not satisfied with that. So I'm putting that on the record. We can discuss then how we progress, but I'll go to Sian first.
I share your views, Chair. I think when I read that, there seems to be, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a tone here that should we be asking for an update when an update was provided? That wasn't 7 weeks ago, it was 7 months ago. This is a very large part of the remit of the department, but our remit as a committee to scrutinise the work that's ongoing. There's not one thing in that that tells me what has been achieved over the last 7 months. Now, if nothing has been achieved, I'd like to know that.
Yep.
And I'd like to understand where the barriers to that work lie. But to send a letter on 2 different points to say we sent an update 7 months ago, I don't think is appropriate at all.
It's very patronising.
It is, and I think that we have had communication from groups who are involved in the co-design or the supposed co-design process who have shown their frustration at not being able to get meetings with the Minister, at not being able to understand what's ongoing with these strategies, and it would just be good to understand if there are barriers, let's hear about them.
Yeah, absolutely, and I don't understand why officials working for the public in departments on feeding into these strategies are not able to be identified or miniatured. All of this just does worry me, I have to say, in terms of absolutely no sense of any real progress, and that's bad enough. But then a sense that we don't even want you to ask what's happening, and that's just not
That's
acceptable.
our role, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely, Kelly.
I think we need to, it is coming to a wider point of the tone and attitude towards the committee. We are a scrutiny committee. We're also here to help the Minister. If there's something that we can do to assist the Minister with this, we would certainly like to do that. On any of the matters, it'd be nice to know. It's this dismissive approach towards us. I just wonder if the Department and the Minister needs to be reminded of what the roles of a committee are. This is happening quite often now, where we're told that arm's length bodies, if they have operational matters, it's almost like, why are you asking again? Are we not to scrutinise the department? Do they not want us to be part of the process? Well, I'm afraid to say it's legally required. So I think that there needs to be something sent to the department to say that such communications are inappropriate and not in keeping with the role of what the committee is legally able to do.
Yeah, no, I think that is important, and I have to say, in relation to the strategy as well, there's repeated reference at times to things being executive strategies, and that's absolutely true. And in the same way that the A5 is an executive priority, there's still a requirement in the Department for Infrastructure to do the work to deliver the strategy to the executive, and that's the case in this department. So when we're asking questions, we know their executive commitments. What we want to know is what the Department for Communities as a statutory committee are doing to deliver those commitments. So I think that does need to be made clear, and really it is essential the committee gets the information. There's nothing that I think has been unreasonable in terms of seeking an update. I think actually what we should do in relation to this item is that we will need to see officials now, I think, and get the questions directly put. I think would be my suggestion, if members are content with that. I also think we should write to TEO on the Irish Language Commissioner and seek an update on that separately as well.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay.
Can we ask for
three?
all of them?
All three, yeah.
Yeah.
Not just the Irish language.
Oh,
Commissioner,
absolutely.
But on the, is it the
Ulster
British?
Scots,
Ulster
Heritage and
Scots,
Culture.
Ulster
Yeah,
British.
absolutely, yes. No, absolutely. I think we should, because they're all tied up in this letter, so we need the information on them all. Absolutely. Thanks, members. Clerk, you have the information. So at page 107 then, there's a reply from the Arts Council on the review of its grant system. The review of the grant system started in May, and the full set of changes will be presented to the board for approval in January 2025. The committee will receive an update on this work once the materials are ready, and the Arts Council will brief the committee at a future meeting on the pressure points it is facing. Members content to note?
Just on the back of that, Jared, what I'd said previously, that was the point that I was going to link to maybe getting a briefing from the department in terms of its culture strand and creativity strand.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Members in page 108, a DWP, Department for Work and Pensions, reply on the Mother and Baby Payment Scheme. A reply from the NIO is in table papers at page 4. The reply states the Minister has asked his officials to provide him with advice so he can consider the position for all means-tested benefits for the scheme beneficiaries. Once the Minister receives that advice, he will carefully consider the position and make a decision about whether to extend the scope of current disregards to apply to this scheme. If DWP decides to make a change, the Minister would also need approval from the Treasury for the costs for doing so. So there's not really a lot of detail there in terms of it's a work in progress. In light of that, I think we should maybe seek an update, maybe say in 12 weeks' time or something, just to keep an eye on something, because this is very time sensitive. And we need to know that work is ongoing, real work is ongoing to address. Kelly?
Can I suggest, because the Executive Office and the TEO Committee are dealing with this at the moment, can we maybe send copies of this to the Executive Office and to that committee, just to make them aware that this committee is also concerned and working on something that they may not have picked up in their work?
Yeah, I think it's
just to make sure that's shared knowledge.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think members content with both those? And content to be seeking, yeah. Okay, on page 109, members, a paper from Gable on its project with shelter. It's a very comprehensive paper, and I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail, but just check if members are content to note, or yes?
I'd just like to note, and I'll just declare that I did visit Gable a few months back in relation to the service that they do provide. Conscious in reading their paper, they did highlight that the housing executive had agreed that they would look at the role in relation to home improvement agencies. Given that there's nearly a £2 million programme by the UK government for that, the benefits of it are amazing, and in relation to the issues that we previously spoke about regarding repair grants, disability grants in particular, it's a really crucial service, and I would like to see this type of service rolled out across the north, to be honest, and supporting tenants to remain in their homes. And it's quite simple and quite small stuff. And I did note in the report, obviously our health trusts also utilise them, and they see the vital importance of it. So from that, is there something that we could write to the housing executive on, given they made a commitment to it back in 2012 to 2015 to review the current role of home improvement agencies? I think it's something we really need to look at, because it can be a really effective and quite effective measure to support our current tenants who are crying out to get support for them to remain in their homes. And they're quite small initiatives and projects that they can do. So with that, I think in the first instance, right to the housing executive maybe would be useful.
Just
members agree, we right on that?
Yeah. Yep. As part of that writing to the housing executive, it would be useful to know the role of shelter and radius, and because over the last number of years you get to know the sort of support that's provided. Shelter is very hand-holding with the Disabled Facilities Grant and has more success rates. They almost take on that project manager type role and help the person, which is amazing, the difference in stress levels that are shared. I'd be very keen to see what the differences are, and the housing executive is undergoing a review. I have an opinion like Ciara. There should be one-stop shop across Northern Ireland that anybody who's gone through those processes is able to access that level of support. Obviously, it'll be for the housing executive, but one of the things that I think would be very important is they talk about the trusted traders scheme. And that insurance list that you're supposed to pick your construction people from, it would be much better if somebody else was taking a look at that, so that the housing executive who issue the grants can't be seen to be manipulating that, but Shelter and Radius could have a very good independent view of that as well.
Just on, would it be also possible to write to the Department of Health? Obviously a similar scheme, the Bryson scheme in Belfast through the likes of PHA, the Trust of Local Councils and stuff, that's operating really successfully as well. So there's some really good models of home improvement agencies, are just not classified or seen as. So would it be possible to write to the Department of Health as well in relation to home improvement agencies, and what support or what information that they have on it and what they're planning to do to support the rollout of this work across each of the trusts?
The models of support available, what work is ongoing, and plans for
To extend
to
across the service,
of the
to make it available across all trusts.
Okay, thanks members. And then moving on to at page 114 and page of your main pack and page 3 of your table papers, there are several replies from councils including Mid, East Antrim, Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon, Belfast and Mid-Ulster in relation to the private landlord registration scheme. The replies each state that a response to committee queries will be provided by Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council as the lead council nominated for the transfer of landlord registration schemes. So I propose, members, that we ask Solace and Lisburn and Castlereagh Council to keep the committee updated on this scheme. And I also suggest that we write to the department to ask that they monitor the scheme, because my fear would be in a situation where we have so much pressures on housing that we find in a year or two's time that there are things about the changeover that haven't worked well or have led to gaps or whatever. So I think it's important that the department are keeping an eye on it and that we keep an eye on it as just over the course of time as well, if members are content. Thank you. At page 116, members, a reply from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport in relation to the provision of sign language on BBC lunchtime news. The reply states that Ofcom's Code on Television Access sets out obligations which apply to the BBC through their framework agreement. For BBC channels, these targets are set at 100% for subtitles, 10% for audio and 5% for signing. The BBC must adhere to the regulatory conditions set by Ofcom and to outline in its annual report how it has reflected, represented and served the diverse community of the whole of the UK, including with regard to disability. Given the BBC's independence from government, including in its editorial and operational decisions, the committee may also wish to raise a concern directly with the BBC. And members, I remind you, we have already written twice to the BBC on that issue. So just to say, and I did raise it with Ofcom again in relation to that in lunchtime. But just in terms of the visibility and the accessibility of that lunchtime service, I've made it very clear that the committee feel that is a retrograde step that shouldn't take, and it flies in the face of us looking at sign language legislation and all of that, in my opinion. But I think we have. So members content to note for now. So members, of page 117, there's a letter from the Commissioner for Older People confirming his attendance at a future meeting. He states that he will refrain from making recommendations on future key areas, but welcomes the opportunity to consider his term in office and offer general views on our ageing population. Members content to note? Yes. And at page 126 then, members have been provided with the PAC report on child poverty as requested last week's meeting. Members content to note?
It's awful, to be honest. It really is. It
is very bad. The one thing I will say, it contains a very significant set of recommendations which I think will be helpful, and I would urge the department to look at those very positively, because I think they're the type of thing I believe that will, and just to declare I'm a member of the PAC who worked on this report, but those are the type of things that will make a difference from a report that failed to deliver, a strategy that failed to deliver versus one that does deliver. So,
can I just say, Chair, there was recommendations that the PAC would be updated. I think that we maybe ask the PAC if we can get access to the updates that they receive as well on this.
Yeah, can we
ask the PAC committee?
Can we sort that, Okay, thanks members. Page 161 then, a reply from TEO, the Executive Office, on disability rights and representation. It states the committee's request for information was shared across the Executive Office and it collated information into the attached table documenting engagement by officials with Executive Office officials with disability fora and their members. Are members content to know? Yeah. At page 166, a departmental reply on carers allowance overpayments. Report states that DWP officials have confirmed that the review of the allowance will be focused on its operational processes and therefore will not seek views from carers stakeholders in the North. It is expected that the findings of the DWP review will be broadly applicable to the North, and on this basis it is not proposed to undertake a similar independent review here. So just to remind members, we are due to receive a briefing on carers allowance at next week's meeting. So members otherwise content to note for now. Yeah. So members, going forward then, I'm going to suggest maybe a slight change in how we deal with matters arising in the future meetings. I would suggest that as similar to correspondence, we provide members with a table of the replies received and a brief summary of them. And then I will ask members if they want to draw out particular items. Now, just to say, I will also draw out, there will be items that I may want to draw out similar to correspondence that I think are of key importance to the members. But I'm thinking the like of multiple replies from local government, from councils, that are coming back, rather than go through all of those, that we sort of manage those a wee bit better to allow more discussion on the key issues. And the members are still free to draw out any of those within matters arising, but it's just a slightly different way of presenting them, rather than go through them one. So if members are content, we'll give that a try and keep an eye on how that works out. Yeah, thank you, members. Correspondence then, members, which is agenda item 5, and the memo is page 169, and a table correspondence memo at page 7 of your table papers. Do members have any comments on any item of correspondence, or are they content to agree the suggested next steps as outlined in that memo? Just checking, Sian.
Yeah, just in terms of the Cliff Edge Coalition, I would be really keen to hear from them as soon as possible. I think the sooner the better that they can fit us in and we can fit them in, just given the time-bound nature of particularly the welfare mitigations issue.
We had one stakeholder that was previously confirmed, I think for the 5th of December, that has indicated just yesterday evening they can't, so there might be an opportunity there.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
That would be
I
really
think in light of we're going to be
cross-check.
discussing a committee motion later, I think that would be very relevant.
Absolutely.
Ciara?
Just in relation to the ministers, the finance deal, and obviously we all very much welcome the 17 million for the winter fuel allowance and the 24 million dedicated to social housing, which is fantastic. Although it's not ideal, we'd like to be, we'd like more, but at least it's progress. With regards to the 11.3 for general fund, I would just maybe like to ask the department from when decisions are made in relation to the allocation of that we get a briefing or made aware of it in writing prior to the announcement of it, because I'm conscious the last time round it was out on Twitter before us as a committee were even made aware of what the allocation was. So just to ask that we do get either written or a briefing on it before it's generally made public.
I would also welcome from the Finance Minister, from Kiva Archibald, in relation to the 17 million for winter fuel allowance, but I think we would very quickly want to know how the department are planning to allocate that 17 million to ensure that those most vulnerable receive it. Kelly?
Very much welcome the additional money for social housing. I think that as a committee we do need clarification from the Minister if that money cannot be spent in this financial year. Can it be rolled forward or applied for and accounted for to move forward, because we all know the issues with Northern Ireland Water, and there may well be difficulties in starting those homes. I know that in the pipeline there are plenty of houses that we can get started, so it's not a case that we have to wait for planning permission, but it may well be that there's issues being able to do them because of the issue with the Northern Ireland Water. So it's just to get clarification on that money. I am sure that he's had more than enough bids in from social housing providers to use twice that, or 3 times that amount of money for new builds, but it's what if they can't spend that money in this financial year? Can it be rolled forward?
There's a question, I've been trying to find this out for long enough now, is where there is a lack of sewage, wastewater and fresh water, constituency by constituency. I can't find the information out so that we could maybe map out where in Northern Ireland that there needs to be money spent
Yeah.
to
So I think
allow
at
housing to
last-
go forward.
At last week's meeting, I think we have agreed to write to.
Yeah.
We are.
We received a response back from the Department for Infrastructure, which contained a link.
To the councils.
Well, it contained a link to the number of applications. However, it also pointed the committee to ask each council. So then the committee agreed last week to go to each council and ask them for that specific information, connection to water, wastewater and sewerage, and how many planning applications are affected
Yeah,
or
but
on
should
hold.
the department themselves not hold that information of where they need to do the work to upgrade their facilities, their own
For
facilities?
communities,
No,
The infrastructure.
we need to
Department for
enter-
Infrastructure.
yeah.
Was it on
Where,
water?
where have they identified the need for expenditure to upgrade facilities? Constituency by constituency.
Well, we will
It
be
is
getting a
in the link.
response,
That is in the link.
Right, I'll check that link.
and we'll be getting a response back from the councils in due course in relation to specific council by council area. So we'll have some information
It's
on that.
just from a meeting I've had, a number of meetings with different bodies. There are 1,900 houses in the planning system, and the construction industry have been saying in general that there will be no new builds from 2028. So this really hits us with housing crisis.
Absolutely fundamental. Okay, so members otherwise content with the correspondence memo?
Yeah.
Thank you. Members, so our next agenda item is deliberations on the clauses of the Child Support Enforcement Bill. I am seeking committee agreement that we moved into closed session for those deliberations. Are members agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Yep, so I'll ask Katie to take us out of broadcasting, please. And we'll take a minute or
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Go ahead, Sean. Thank you. So I'm waiting confirmation then from committee staff that and broadcasting that we're back in open session. Waiting on that process now.
Confirmed and open.
Okay, members, so we're moving on now, members, to agenda item 7, which is a briefing by the Equality Commission, and a copy of the briefing paper is at page 300 there. I welcome the following representatives now to the meeting. So we're welcoming Geraldine McGahey, who is Chief Commissioner, Darren McKinstry, who is Director of Public Policy and Strategic Engagement, and Catherine Barr, who is Senior Policy Officer with the Equality Commission. So Geraldine, delighted to have you here today, and I will invite you to go ahead and brief the committee on your paper, please, before we move to members' questions. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. And everyone's already been introduced, so I'll not take up time with that. But just to say that the Commission has significant duties under the Disability Discrimination Act, and indeed the Equality Northern Ireland Order of 2000 regarding the elimination of discrimination against and the harassment of people with disabilities, and indeed the promotion of equality of opportunity for them. However, we're here today in a very specific remit under that legislation, and that is we are required to be your advisors in relation to the appropriateness of the existing legislation and make recommendations for change. So that is why we are here. As you know, Northern Ireland has really a patchwork of equality legislation, and in the simplest terms, it means that people living here have less opportunity for protection of their rights than people across GB and indeed the island of Ireland. Discrimination laws just do not protect them in some areas. Disabled people currently have protections under the Disability Discrimination Act and the Special Educational Needs and Disability Northern Ireland Order. However, these laws are very much inconsistent and they are confusing and provide much less protection against discrimination, harassment and victimisation for people here than their counterparts across neighbouring jurisdictions. For example, there is no freestanding protection against harassment except in employment and in further and higher education. And you all know that harassment is the unwanted conduct which violates a person's dignity.
related to a specific characteristic of that person, such as disability, such as race, sex, etc. This type of conduct is quite clearly prohibited under other equality grounds compared to disability. For over a decade, the Commission has been calling for changes to improve our disability equality law. By harmonising and simplifying the disability legislation, we would make it easier for disabled people to understand their rights and know how they can challenge less favourable treatment or a failure to make reasonable adjustments. Clarifying the currently confusing legislation would not just benefit the individual, but would benefit employers and service providers. I'll give you an example. For instance, if you were to go online and read the Disability Discrimination Act, you'll be met with a lengthy list of provisions, including 5 different sections covering the meaning of discrimination. Some elements have been repealed and some differ from others. If an individual, employer or service provider is trying to understand discrimination, I can guarantee you they are going to struggle. Legal experts will also tell you that they will struggle. In comparison, the race legislation has one article setting out what direct and indirect discrimination actually are, which applies across the scope of that particular piece of legislation. Also, as you know, case law sets precedent and impacts on interpretation of any legislation. As a result of a very specific case way back some 15 years ago in the Supreme Court, it's often referred to as the Malcolm case, protections were very much narrowed. That case, in essence, meant that a disabled person had to compare what they were receiving, the service they were receiving, against what anybody else would receive. Equality is not about treating everybody equally. It is about making extra provision to ensure that everyone has equality of opportunity. Some need more help than others. In essence, that case really shrunk the ability to do that. An example of how that might play out in real life is someone going to a restaurant with a guide dog. If the restaurant refuses admission of dogs or any other animal, they can be refused. Some people will look at the legislation and say, oh, therefore I couldn't go in, I don't have a guide dog. But other piece of legislation, in terms of reasonable adjustments, might well make that a requirement that you can take a guide dog in. So there's a very simple, everyday situation that reading the legislation can be confusing. So the other aspect really related to disability is the protections against direct and indirect discrimination. The reasonable adjustments element takes you into a different scenario. But we also want to see protections against indirect disability discrimination, which would align with the legal protections afforded to other equality grounds in Northern Ireland and are provided for under the Equality Act 2010 across the rest of the UK. Why should we be treated any differently here in Northern Ireland? Our disabled people should have the same entitlements. These changes would prohibit actions and policies that apply to everyone equally, but which place disabled people at a disadvantage. Such protection would help tackle systemic discrimination against disabled people. So in other words, it's about making sure there's the equality of opportunity rather than equal treatment. Northern Ireland legislation really does need to change, but we want this to deliver the best laws that we can get that reflect the needs of people here in Northern Ireland. We want to build upon the lessons from GB and from other jurisdictions so that the citizens here in Northern Ireland can get the best that's available. It remains the Commission's view that rather than reforming each of our equality laws separately, we would be better to work towards a single Equality Act. But we have to be pragmatic, we have to be realistic, and achieving that could be exceptionally difficult in this country. So an incremental change is better than no change. It's not just us that are calling for change. We know that you have met with and heard from other disabled people highlighting the need for reform. These long-standing calls have been echoed at absolutely the highest level. You know that in 2017, the Committee on UNCRPD recommended that the State Party, and I quote, take the necessary measures through the appropriate authorities once the Northern Ireland Government is in place to ensure that the Northern Ireland Executive reform on disability rights law reflects the recommendations made by the Equality Commission in its 2012 Strengthening Protection for Disabled People report to protect persons with disabilities in Northern Ireland from direct and indirect disability-based discrimination and discrimination through association. Well, you're all back here, you're in government now. So is it not time for action? Because we genuinely need the reform, we need change, we need to provide better protections for disabled people who make up almost a quarter of our population. We understand the committee's focus today is on disability law reform, but I suppose it would be very remiss of me not to mention, while I'm here, the broader need for progression on the executive's social inclusion strategies, including disability, anti-poverty, sexual orientation and gender equality, which are all being led by DFC. These were promised in the New Decade New Approach, and we're still waiting. I know there's a chink of light at the end of the tunnel as we understand the anti-poverty and the disability strategies will be progressed in the next financial year. However, it's important to see all 4 strategies being delivered during this mandate, and I know time is short, but really it's for the benefit of everyone in society, and it has to be informed by those who will be most affected by them. Strategies will provide a roadmap for all government departments and every other public sector organisation to work towards, to promote equality, but while we continue to wait for them, inequality, discrimination and hate crime are continuing. Inequalities are worsening. So thank you for listening, and my colleagues and I are here to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I have to say, some very worrying messages and some very obvious things that absolutely need to be. And we share. I do think there is a concern around the development, and we have referred to and we have put in a series of questions around the strategies, and we I think share that view that those need to be progressed as a priority. I suppose, in your view, where should the Minister be looking for best practice? And I don't think we should be impeded by, we should seek to lead in world terms and be the area best. But currently, where would you direct the Minister or the Department to look for examples of good practice in this?
The starting point has to be across the rest of the UK. And you will have case laws I referred to earlier that will highlight deficiencies within that legislation. That's your starting point. But you also look across the rest of Europe and further afield internationally to see what has worked and what hasn't worked. And there is already a bank of information in terms of case law that has shown the strengths and weaknesses of legislation on an international basis. So that's where I would be saying you go. You don't limit yourself to your nearest neighbours, but you look to see what is the best and most effective. Because you only get one bite at this cherry in a number of decades, as our history has shown. So if you're going to do it once, you make sure you do it to the best of your ability and you future-proof it, because it's so hard to come back to the table a second time.
Thank you. And in relation to, and I note your comments in relation to the disability, what discussions have you had in relation to disability strategy, and what's your, and I think you've touched on it already, but what is your view in terms of the timing of the development of the strategy?
Well, I think at the outset, you really have to accept that the development of any strategy has to be realistic. It can't be a wish list. It can't be just a list of things that various stakeholders want to see done. And that's always a problem and a risk of co-design, but it's how that process is managed, because true co-design is about everybody putting their wish list on the table, but being part of the compromise as to what can be achieved and what can't. So that applies to any strategy, not just particularly to this one. I think it's frustrating for stakeholders who participated in the co-design process to have been involved in that whole process of identifying what needs to be done, but having heard nothing back. Our own officers were involved in that, the Commission was represented. But I have to stress, we're not there as another NGO or a lobby group. We are there because the law requires us to be there to advise government departments and yourselves on what is needed, what's working and what's not. That is in legislation. And I feel a little bit frustrated in that that loop is not being closed and that we are not being informed on what's going forward or what the current status is in relation to that strategy. I know it's within an action plan that it should be delivered within the next year, but a little bit more communication and openness and transparency would go a long way, because we would not want to be in the position where a strategy comes to us and then we have to be critical of it. We would rather be working in partnership to take it forward. But Darren leads the team that have been engaged in that, and I'll ask him if he wants to add anything to it.
Yeah, I think one of the things to bear in mind is also the story of the last strategy, which while a grand strategy, was one, I think, really of practical failure of delivery. There wasn't a particular focus on delivery. There wasn't particularly an oversight mechanism for that delivery, certainly, which involved stakeholders, and that's now lapsed quite a while ago. And while there has been this genesis sort of since 2020 with these strategies and a lot of engagement with the sector at that time, it has in essence been one way, not really co-design in terms of proposals coming back, which could then be challenged. And so we understand that there is this focus on delivering anti-poverty and disability within this business plan year of the Department for Communities, but we also understand that there's no proposals to reform those co-design groups, but to do engagement in some other way. And we are concerned that there would be just a rush to consultation or a rush to publication. We do want to see a strategy which is properly prioritised and resourced, but which also takes account of that lived experience and expertise, and it's important to get it right. Otherwise you just repeat the failures of the past and don't get the delivery. I would also stress the importance of that oversight group. DFC committed in 2016, I think, to establish a Northern Ireland Regional Disability Forum. It was to inform government policy generally, not just the disability strategy. It hasn't been set up as yet, but that itself, one of its jobs of work could be the disability strategy, and then out more broadly into the wider work that the disability strategy itself will inform.
Can I just add, I want to stress again the need for everybody who participates in those kind of forums to be realistic about what can be achieved. It's not an opportunity for a wish list or for closing down wish lists. It's about everybody coming to an agreement as to what can be achieved over a certain time frame. Yes, it has to be aspirational, it has to be challenging, it has to literally drive things forward, but it must be realistic. We always talk about smart targets contained within strategies and business plans, and that's where that degree of realism and achievable comes in whilst being challenging. And I want to stress that because I fear that it's not always at the forefront of people's minds when they are participating in groups. And I'm not being critical of any particular group. I say the same at other committee meetings as well, so it's not just about these 4 strategies.
Yeah, thank you, and I totally agree. I actually see this as being fundamental, that co-design, co-production process as being fundamental, and I say this all the time as well. It's not a chore for departments or anyone drafting up a strategy, it's actually a resource, and that's the way it should be engaged with. It should not be an event, it should be hardwired in as part of an ongoing process, including the review and that. And the committee has urged the department to engage with those groups that have worked on those strategies. We've had them in and we've made that very, very clear. So I do agree with you, and I would reiterate that today, I have to say. So I'll go to Kelly first of all. Kelly?
Thank you very much, Geraldine. Thank you, Darren and Catherine. In advance of you coming here, I reached out to some of the organisations just to say, so what would be the questions you would ask? And to be honest, overwhelmingly, I got frustration from them all, especially those who had been involved in that, the grouping that was working towards the disability strategy that was disbanded in 2023. They have not been communicated well with to even thank them for the work that they have done, and they're left in limbo now thinking, well, what happens next? I'm extremely concerned about the disability strategy because this is a disability strategy for Northern Ireland, not a disability strategy for the Department for Communities. The oversight, as Darren mentioned, wasn't available in the last strategy. Do you think that the department as a necessity should include an oversight piece within that strategy that requires a reporting mechanism, not just for the Department for Communities, but all the departments to confirm the actions and the progress that they are taking?
I'll start this, and then I think Darren will probably want to come in as well. Every strategy needs to have some mechanism of oversight. Otherwise, how do you hold that group to account in terms of what has been delivered and what hasn't been delivered? I think if we use like the racial equality strategy that's coming to an end as an example, the racial equality subgroup have been really frustrated in terms of the accountability. But it goes much wider than that, because these kind of strategies, as you've said yourself, are cross-cutting across all departments. That sort of comes up against who is the lead department and the minister. How is that strategy resourced, and how does every other minister contribute resources to that? That gets us into that whole impact, of the accumulation of reductions and cuts, etc. But there must be ownership by every minister and every department of that, and it does require cooperation. But I think in terms of a co-design group, it is insulting, it is frustrating, it is belittling, and I think we share their frustration because we're in the same boat, despite the fact that we wear a very different hat. But we share their frustration. They need to be communicated with, and what goes forward in that strategy has to be agreed with them. It can't be just we take your wish list away and we produce a shortened version of that. What goes forward must have the buy-in of everyone who was in that process so far. Over to you, Darren.
Yes, so I would just build on that with the importance of, well, there's layers to it really. I mean, DFC are the lead department. DFC will be very quick to tell you these are executive strategies, and I think that's a fair point. Oversight is vitally important. There's been an approach in the past, and I think possibly in the last disability strategy, I can't quite recall, of at best annual reporting. But that's not enough, because it lacks then that rolling challenge function to shape. It's not about hearing that, at the end that something hasn't been delivered. It's about how you shape. So I think that idea of rolling oversight is important, and that has to involve those in the sector as well. I think there's something also important about a direct route to the minister on it, so that it's not just held at official level, that there is built into it ministerial attendance at least some of the meetings, so those routes can be through. And because they're executive strategies, then you also have to think about the executive's role in tying in with the other ministers. Because again, I think in that co-design process, to be fair to the Department for Communities, their officials worked hard to engage with, but by design that whole process did not involve officials from the other departments. They were dealt with either a separate process or became involved in the co-design process right at the end, and there was a sense of not having been on the journey, and therefore it was very difficult to persuade to do something more than was happening. So I think that is a key thing about oversight as well, that it has to be more interactive across the departments.
I'm extremely concerned because feedback from the department is they will be responding back on what the Department of Communities is involved in and nothing else. And I think the suggestion was that committees can have joint meetings if they want to scrutinise another department, which is, to be honest, a load of rubbish. We either have scrutiny or we don't. So I'm wondering if we don't have an oversight mechanism built into the disability strategy that requires a lead department to report on behalf of the progress of the strategy, I think we're actually, what's the point in writing it? Mm-hmm. Because we've had plenty of strategies that sit in shelves and people talk about them, but there's no actions. Can I just ask as well for clarification? I noted that you guys have been very concerned about this strategy for a long time. Way back in 2023, you talked about the Windsor Framework 2 as a requirement to uphold rights and equality protections for persons with disabilities. Because we're not meeting that at the moment, is there any actions that maybe or could be taken by someone against Northern Ireland Government on that?
The Windsor Framework, Article 2, it is in relation to legislation that was in place prior to the exit of the UK on the 31st of December, January of 2020. If it wasn't on our statute books at that time, then there is no obligation to move forward. It was not contained within the 6 directives in terms of keeping pace. What it does require is, if there's legislation being introduced, that it is considered in the context of the Good Friday Agreement and the equality of rights and opportunities and human rights as well. So that's not really an issue. I think it's more in relation to UNCRPD and the fact that the EU had had adopted it. We here in the UK still have that obligation that was in place upon us prior to Brexit. We have not taken an informed position or a decision in relation to our policy positions on incorporation of those requirements. However, we do advocate that the Northern Ireland Assembly should follow and comply with the needs of that. Along with the Human Rights Commission, the Equality Commission is required to monitor progress and to feed back in that process. And we do facilitate a group that look at that and keep that under supervision, under monitoring, and we feed back. And that's the quote that I was giving you from 2017 in terms of the absolute lack of progress. It was contained within it that once you get back into government, let's get things moving. And really that's what we're expecting to happen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Geraldine Down and Catherine, and it's very palpable for the frustration and maybe lack of progress. What we can say is basically the failure of the previous strategy in relation to delivery. Couple of questions I just have. Do you believe that maybe the need for legislation should be incorporated within the actual strategy going forward? That would be one. And then in relation to the social model of disability, could you maybe expand upon that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll let Catherine come in on the social models to make it real for you. But in terms of whether legislation should be included in the strategy, if there's a delay in agreeing a strategy, please don't delay the reform of the legislation. If you want to include it as a priority within the strategy, if the strategy is ready to hit the ground running in the next number of weeks or months, fine, so be it. But the reform of legislation is absolutely crucial, and I wouldn't want it to be delayed because people couldn't agree on a strategy. So it's all down to DFC and to the executive as to whether or not they can agree one before the other.
And are we aware that that's an element of the strategy?
Well, it has been an element in other strategies that there would be legislative reform. But that in itself, we're in a much stronger position in terms of reform of legislation for disabled people because of the work that has been done to date and the consultation that has been undertaken. So let's not hold up that piece of legislation straight away. If I can invite Catherine to come in about the society model, and then I think Darren might want to add something about in relation to the legislation as well.
So the social model of disability is really the model that's taken up by UNCRPD and others, and it's around looking at the barriers that are placed that prevent disabled people taking part. So not focusing on people's disability, but focusing maybe on the barriers. And that's physical barriers, legal barriers, societal barriers, and what's in the way. And that's something to go back to one of the chair's questions about where we should be looking for best practice. That's somewhere where we think the Equality Act in 2010 perhaps didn't go far enough in their definition of disability. They weren't taking account of that social model, and we would be saying we should go further and consider what is the best practice in terms of taking that wider look and whole of society approach really to disability.
Do you want to come in on the legislation?
Yeah, just on the very specific point about, is disability law reform in the draft strategy? We simply don't know. We're not being shown. We're not getting that level of feedback. What we can tell you is that through the co-design process, it was a key issue for the expert panel who called for it. Through the wider co-design group themselves, it was a key issue of call for it. And if you go to our landing page at equalityni.org/disability, it is the top thing in our list that we want done. So the department is very clear on the need for it, and we would hope that it will feature prominently. But as Geraldine has said, it's something that the department can move on now. They don't have to wait on the strategy. We've been talking to officials about them making progress on that.
Thank you. Morris.
Thank you, Chair. Taking on board everything you've said, and thanks very much for your presentation, but the one point that I'd like to take up is the Disability Forum, which you alluded to hadn't even sat yet. Do you think this committee could put pressure on the Minister to form that committee up, that Disability Forum, and what benefit would it bring to the overall aims of yourselves?
Yeah. So yes, I think it was 2016 that DFC made a commitment to establish a Northern Ireland Regional Disability Forum. So it's not that it hasn't met, it hasn't been established, they haven't moved on. We did understand that some work was being done by officials to look at it while the executive was in abeyance there recently, but we haven't heard anything further since. So we think it's absolutely vital and important. It was not intended to just inform the disability strategy. It is there to inform the wider work of government, and we feel that it is important that that is not lost, that it should not just be something linked to the oversight of the strategy. We think it's vitally important, not least in the context of the last failure of the disability strategy, because of course the disability strategy is there to inform the work of all the departments. So if the strategy fails, ultimately the work of all the departments fail in some way. So we feel it would be vitally important because A, it's lived experience, but B, it's also a deep well of expertise that are there, and it's something that we as a commission benefit from. We, through our UN work, have set up our own stakeholder forum, and it's there to inform our work, and we benefit massively in both of those areas. So we absolutely feel that something similar within and across government would make a seismic difference.
I'll just add that forum actually joins with the Commission in feeding back to the NCRPD and their committees in relation to reporting on progress of the various governments right across the UK in terms of their disability actions.
And sorry, you absolutely could assist us in calling on the department to get it set up.
That'd be something we could take up, Chair. The other thing, Chair, is look, in my experience, strategies or anything you do, if you don't bring people with you, you're doing it to them, not for them, and that's a failure.
We would agree with that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Brian.
Well, thank you for the presentation and the information so far. I want to ask a wee bit more about job applications, and you've already referred to that, about adaptations that can be made to whatever medical condition somebody has to make it possible for them to work. But there will be jobs where, due to the physical nature of the job or the working environment, where someone's physical ability will be a factor in their ability to do the job, construction, agriculture, and so on. Can you clarify then, what is it you're saying there? Prohibit questions by employers relating to disability. There will be types of work where it will be relevant to ask that question, and it's to avoid employers being in a situation where they feel they can't even put that on an application form or can't ask a question, where it will be a major issue, on somebody's ability to do a certain type of job or work in a certain environment.
It's all about reasonableness.
Yeah.
And if a job is very specific, then that is legitimate to define that. But Catherine, you want to come in on it?
Yes, maybe just to say, so first thing, this provision was put in GB in 2010 and it's been working, as I understand it, well. The concern would be if people are coming to jobs and they're being faced with long questionnaires about their health that aren't relevant to the job, it's putting them off applying, and we know that Northern Ireland has a massive disability employment gap. There are issues around reasonable adjustments that people need both in job applications and then in the job, and it may be that reasonable adjustments aren't possible in every situation, and that's okay. And ourselves at the Commission can offer advice to individuals and employers on that and how to navigate it, because it will be, what's reasonable for one small business that is perhaps very physical jobs might be different from a very large office-based organisation. So there will be scope to ask reasonable questions and to make reasonable adjustments in that way in order to do that. But it's these long questionnaires where people are being put off applying, and then they're not sure if when they're applying for the job and maybe don't get it, is it because I said something that wasn't relevant but they're discriminating against me? And that would be illegal, but it's hard to know when those questionnaires, there's just always that bit of doubt in people's mind, and it puts people off applying.
Yeah.
Like in all legislation, Fair Employment Treatment Order, there is the genuine occupation exemption. So you take into account of what the job entails, and you can write your advert and your description in accordance with that. So there would be provision made to allow an advert to ask, or an application form to ask specific ability questions. But that should be inferred in terms of the actual job description itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I come in a supplementary just on that. I'm aware that there are a number of community and voluntary sector organisations are in advanced stage with the Department for Communities on their disability and work strategy. They are afraid that it will be held back because it will be included in the disability strategy. Do you think that they should just get a move on and get that published?
I'd get a move on and get it published.
Thank you. I agree.
And if they need any advice from the Commission, as Catherine and Darren have both said, contact us and we'll talk to them about it. But I would go ahead.
And certainly, maybe just to add, I understand colleagues are engaging on that, and we have been involved in that.
Yeah, and we often hear the phrase bandied about economic inactivity, and at every opportunity I challenge it around the notion of a lot of it, in particular what we're speaking about today, is around economic disadvantage.
Absolutely. If you consider, 38% of people with a disability are actually in employment, what's happening to everybody else? Yeah. There's an employment gap of over 40% between able-bodied and disabled people. Yeah. We've got the worst figures across the whole of the UK.
Yeah. And the danger is if you misname it, if you don't understand it, you then try to deal with the wrong problem, and you don't advance. So I think that is fundamental. I think also I have to say, and I noted what you said about, if everyone agrees, my issue around that is it has to be got in front of the executive as a priority to get them to disagree or more positively agree, but it needs to be got there by the Department for Communities. So I think it's urgent that was taken into account. Okay, any other questions, members? I think, but that's been really, I'll come back to you, Andy. That's been really, really good. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And maybe can I bring us back to the previous iteration of the disability strategy? And obviously you talked about the oversight aspect of that and the failing of it. But are there any other key examples you would point to as where the strategy succeeded or worked well, or perhaps more importantly where it didn't?
Do you want to take it?
To be honest, it's such a while ago since that strategy ended. The gap has been so substantial, it's hard to recall. But certainly I'm left with the overarching view that there was very little delivery from it. I mean, it was generally considered not to have delivered well. Now, that's not true just of the disability strategies. It is generally a failure of the equality strategies. To talk about a good example in a slightly different area, the race equality strategy for much of its life cycle was not delivering, and there was a great pressure from the racial equality subgroup, which is made up of a range of stakeholders, in around 2020, I think, in terms of a mid-term review, and through working with TEO and Dennis McMahon, who was a senior official at the time, the department agreed to move on 3 priorities. And they have moved on those 3 priorities: race law reform, on ethnic equality monitoring for public services. They're not across the line yet, which is always a worry when things aren't across the line. But it did point to the importance of that strong oversight group and an ability to challenge right through into the Permanent Secretary and then the Minister to come along and make a commitment. So I think there are lessons from other strategies that really sit behind some of the recommendations we've made to you today already.
I'll just add to that. In terms of any strategy going forward, there must be oversight, and there must be oversight at the most senior level, and to me that's ministerial level. On a cross-cutting strategy such as this, it can't be just one minister, it has to be more than that. But there has to be a genuine attempt to review that strategy at specific periods of time. You can't just wait till you're coming to 2 or 3 years before the end of it to say, well, what have we done? It has to be a living document. And if it's to include, smart objectives in terms of being realistic and achievable and that people can buy into, society moves on, circumstances change over the life cycle of a strategy. What on earth is to prevent people from sitting down and saying, is this strategy still relevant? Do we need to be moving a different direction slightly? So if it's a true living document and it has accountability, it will be delivered. And I think that's what's been missing from our strategies historically here in Northern Ireland.
No, I appreciate that, and I think you've already answered this question, but if I can just clarify so I don't misquote you, but in terms of the Commission's own advisory role, do you feel that that's being fully leveraged by government departments here?
No.
Why do you feel that's not being fully leveraged?
I don't really know the answer because I haven't been around for going back in time in this particular role. But I think there is a growing belief that the Equality Commission is there as another voice, another stakeholder and a lobby group. if you go back to the primary legislation, which is not contained in the Northern Ireland Act but is referred to in the Northern Ireland Act, it actually makes it clear that our role is to advise government and government departments on the appropriateness of legislation in terms of equality and make recommendations and proposals for change.
Okay.
That has fallen on deaf ears, on barren ground, whatever phrase you want to use. It hasn't been enacted. We have not been consulted on proposed new legislation in a number of areas, yet we are expected to keep government advised as to the appropriateness of it. We do not want to find ourselves in a position where something is led before us for us to consult on the same as everyone else, and we have to be critical of it. We would rather be an enabler and helping government departments to get it right the first time, rather than to waste the resources and the time of having to change it later on down the road. So that's my frustration.
No, indeed, and frustration, and it's concern from my part that you're not being fully leveraged, your experience and knowledge isn't being taken forward, and obviously that in part answers my next question around disability legislative reform and review of those frameworks. Previously, when I engaged with the department, they said that they haven't reviewed those frameworks, so would you be encouraging the department again to commence a review instead of waiting for the disability strategy in terms of disability law reform?
Yeah, I'm going to let Darren speak on that.
Yes, absolutely. There was as recently in the last fortnight, we were in front of the senior DFC officials talking about the importance of law reform and encouraging them to take this forward. And we understand that is being given some consideration, but we do want to see sort of a public commitment to that and work to progress. You know, with Catherine and myself, you're looking at the Commission's entire legal policy team here, and it's not just disability law reform, it's all the areas of law reform. So we really have to, where we do seek to support the departments, we really have to try and work in a very timed and concise way. In 2012, we produced detailed recommendations for what law reform would look like, because it was a material issue then, but the department has not moved on them. We have encouraged and got the support of the UN, who have said that government should move on our specific recommendations. We've built the support of the expert panel through the disability strategy, through wider stakeholders who've been in front of you, and indeed it was their evidence that prompted us to be here today. So it's very clear that our advice is understood and accepted and valued, but it is not being progressed as it stands by the department. And part of what we were saying last week with the department was A, please move on it, but B, give us a sense of your timeline so that we can seek within our very limited resources to prepare ourselves to engage with you, to give you updated recommendations and advice. So it goes both to our resources, but also to the importance of the department being open and communicating about where its thinking is and what its timelines are.
I would suggest refer them to Section 4 of the Equality, Disability, etc., Northern Ireland Order 2000, and they'll see exactly what they should be doing.
No, I appreciate that. And I suppose, so you've had nothing from the department by way of its intention around reforming our disability legislation here in Northern Ireland?
There's no public commitments, as you say. We haven't. It was in the last disability strategy. We're not sure what's in this disability strategy. We understand from a conversation with officials a couple of weeks ago that consideration has been given, but we haven't seen anything in terms of public confirmation of that, or indeed if it will
Nothing concrete.
And by when.
And from your experience and expertise, given the vast area that it is and the importance of getting it right, do you foresee that could be achieved in this mandate?
Yes.
Okay.
With hard work and a willingness to move forward.
I think certainly the work could be achieved in this mandate, whether it makes it through the legislative timetable onto the books, but certainly what you don't wait is to the start of the next mandate, you know. I think that's a key thing, and why we're saying the department don't wait, start now.
No, and I would agree with that, and I was asking for your viewpoint on that. I believe it could be achieved with hard work, and I think we're all up for that hard work to deliver it. We've had far too long in this place being down and not delivering for all of our people, so we all should be putting our shoulder to the wheel to deliver that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, and I have to say, as part of your discussion, I was struck by the idea of reviewing it, which actually fundamentally underlines the value that a forum would have in terms of doing that. Like, I mean, even in terms of technology is progressing at a rate we've never seen here, and those should be constantly worked in. In relation to that, it was mentioned earlier in relation to the recent PAC, and just to be clear that I am a member of the PAC, but there's a series of recommendations around the child poverty report. Are there part of those recommendations that you think the department should now be actively working into all of the strategies, in particular around governance and how you review? Are there elements of that report that should be now taken and applied to other strategies?
Well, I suppose just very briefly to say, obviously those recommendations were made very specifically in the context of that child poverty strategy, and I think then it talks about the anti-poverty strategy. Yeah. And the 4 social inclusion strategies are so interlinked. If there's lessons for the anti-poverty strategy, there's lessons for the disability strategy and the others. And from my understanding of those recommendations, they're really focused on monitoring and including stakeholders and the community and voluntary sector. Yep. And that will be relevant for the anti-poverty strategy, but also for the other strategies as well. So certainly, without being fully acquainted with all the details of what I think was quite a lengthy report, from a quick look at the recommendations, there will be things that are relevant there, certainly.
Yeah, Andy, a quick one, please.
Yeah, sure, just come back quickly and slightly pivot into another topic. Obviously, as a society, we're stronger when we have more people with lived experience involved. Is there anything you would like to say, or any input you could give us around how we can encourage and facilitate more people with disabilities being involved in political life?
It's about making a commitment to engaging people in public life. There is a problem in terms of data collection and monitoring, because you're relying on very scant information to say just how many people are involved in public life with a disability. And I suspect it's an awful lot higher than people suspect because of hidden disabilities. But we actively promote people to get engaged in public life and apply for public appointments when they have a disability. We've had some conversations about the criteria that's used for assessing people through that appointment process. And it doesn't just reflect on people with disabilities, but also with younger people and people who maybe have not worked in many, many years and can't really answer the criteria that some of our questions ask. So it's much wider than that, but it is one of our key objectives, and it's within our corporate plan for many, many years. Catherine, you want to come in?
I suppose just also to add, there's a very hostile environment for anybody who wants to get involved in politics in terms of hate speech online, and that obviously impacts on particular groups, including disabled people, and certainly we've made a range of recommendations around social attitudes, community relations, and tackling hate speech, including online. So I think there's those wider issues that feed in and maybe put off a lot of people, but particularly people from particular equality groups, including disabled people, from entering public life.
And what do you feel the level of support that's available from government departments? I know obviously we have initiatives and programmes such as Access to Work for people who want to be supported and need to be supported into work, but do you feel there are support programmes, and how effective do you think they are?
Yeah, if I link that back into the sort of participation in public life point, it is one of the things we've identified again for the importance of the disability strategy. Absolutely, the importance of training and capacity building is central important, and they have to be provided not just in a generic way, but meets the needs and availability of those who are seeking the opportunities. But Catherine talked about the background of hate, but there's also things like ensuring that information about the opportunities, but also the training is accessible, that there is that outreach to raise awareness and to encourage participation in areas where people may feel is not for them. Removing access barriers, also providing support services as well, are all things that we have identified that should be a focus of both participation in public life, but also in making sure that training is accessible and delivered in an appropriate way.
Just on the same point, you asked about the effectiveness of what's happening. I met a gentleman a while back who has a disability and had serious problems in the employment that he was in, lost his job. He only found the support that he needed by researching it on the internet. There was no signposting for him, but he managed to stumble, and I use that word with great caution, he stumbled upon a programme that would help someone with his type of disability get into employment with a particular employer. That guy has thrived, and he has got massive promotion, and as a result of his progress within that company, has set up a forum on an international basis to help people like him but there was no signposting, and that drove it home to me that maybe we could do a lot more as a society to signpost people with very specific needs where best to get training and support for their specific circumstances. So we can do more.
No, indeed, and I'm struck by that. There are some very good schemes available to support individuals. Certainly they could be expanded and they could do more. But there are some good schemes there, and we need to do all we can to signpost and point people to them. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So a couple of brief with Kelly. Sorry, I have Ciara first.
Just a brief one, and I know there's probably key actions now that as a committee we can go forward on regarding the Disability Forum, progressing the legislation, not waiting around, and then the oversight body. But what really dismayed me the most, to be honest, Geraldine, is that area where under Section 4 it's not being utilised by the departments, and they're not seeing how critical it is, because equality, equity underpins everything that we do. I'm wondering, is there something that maybe Equality Commission could look at and maybe feed back to us, even in writing, just a wider kind of
where we can help or where we can get
analysis of, because I'm conscious, like at other committees, I'm constantly asking, and everything we do, have you went to the Human Rights, have you went to the Equality Commission to get a response, and sometimes, to be honest, you kind of feel they're looking at me with square eyes.
Yeah.
Are you serious? So I am dismayed. It's across all departments, and I think if there's something we could do with yourselves in relation to unpacking it, and seeing what recommendations could go back to all government departments and the Executive Office on this issue.
We would be absolutely delighted to work with you on that. Now, in fairness to the officials, if you're looking at the Northern Ireland Act, it talks very specifically about the Human Rights Commission and sets out a different role than we are actually defined as having within the Northern Ireland Act. But in one of the very early sections in release where it talks about the Equality Commission, it refers you back to the powers and duties and responsibilities that our predecessor organisations had, because the Equality Commission was bringing together a number of existing organisations in the remit of equality. So those powers and responsibilities got carried forward. But if it's not set out using those precise words and defined within the Northern Ireland Act, you can understand why some officials don't necessarily see it. The piece of legislation that I referred to there in terms of the 2000 legislation, that's separate from the Northern Ireland Act. That was done in 2000. It wasn't done in 1998. So it requires a wider understanding of legislation. And when something's in front of you, I have to bring in and consult the Human Rights Commission, and we're not mentioned, then you can understand why that happens. And I don't believe it's an intentional thing. I think it's just the way circumstances have evolved. But it's time to really stop this, because none of us have infinite resources, and we certainly do not have an infinite time frame to do this work. Let's get it right at the first bite, that we don't have to keep going round and round and round until we do get it right. So it's about working together in collaboration and in genuine partnership and trust to get it right. Yes. And that's what we're up for. And we want that message out at every opportunity to let people know that that's why we're here.
As the Department of Health talk about right first time. And again, I go back to that point about seeing these steps as a resource rather than a chore or a barrier, and use the resource and the expertise and hardwire it in at the very start.
Equality is about everyone in society, about making sure we've all got the best opportunities, that we have the ability to maximise our opportunities. It's about people. And if we as a society are genuinely committed to putting people at the heart of policy making, then let's get it right first time.
Ellie, last word to you briefly, please.
This is a question that will benefit, I think it would benefit people with disabilities, and it would benefit all of the groups. When we look at the equality impact assessment and how it is currently done by the civil service, we're not discriminating against X, Y and Z. Is it now time that we should switch that round for more positive action, to say that Section 75 should be, these are the proactive actions we are taking to include X, Y and Z groups?
Yes. At the outset,
I would want to say that there has been real good progress across all of the departments in terms of complying with their Section 75 duties and their equality impact assessments, and they have been doing some really good work. That's not to say it's perfect. There are still a lot of gaps. We've been having some conversations as to how best to give guidance in terms of a cumulative approach and a cross-sectoral approach. And that process is ongoing. I, as Chief Commissioner, and I'm speaking only as Chief Commissioner and the Board of Commissioners as opposed to the executive team, believe that it's really time now to have another serious review of how Section 75 is complied with. I have the luxury of being a poacher turned gamekeeper as being a former Chief Executive. So I know the resistance that there was to me within me and my organisation to bureaucracy. I think there needs to be a cultural change in how the equality duty is complied with, because it's the officials' opportunity to say to decision makers, in other words, ministers, we have ensured that your equality obligations have been taken into account up to this point. Once you get to that decision maker at ministerial level, Section 75 doesn't apply, but the officials should be taking it seriously to make sure that they're demonstrating to their masters that yes, they have done this. They're protecting the minister at that point. But I think we can do more. And as I stressed at the beginning, equality is not about treating everybody equally. And I think this is a fundamental issue in terms of impact assessments. It's about ensuring that everyone has the equality of opportunity, which means treating people differently. So to say everyone's treated the same and therefore no one's being disadvantaged is absolutely a falsehood. So we've got work to do and we're up for it.
Okay, listen, thank you very much. A very, very interesting session. I think members' questions reflect that interest and the interest of the committee in this area, and it is something that we want to ensure that we start to get those improvements very quickly. But thank you for your paper, thank you for your question and answers, and I wish you well in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, and if we can help in any other way, please just let us know, and we're happy to come back or to give you written submissions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you.
All the best now, Darren, Catherine and Geraldine. Okay, members, so I think there's a couple of very obvious things in terms of following up. First of all is around the legislative plans, I think, of the department in this respect, given what we've heard and the evidence we've heard today. So would members be content that we write to the department in relation to asking them their plans about that?
Sure, if I can just expand on that, it's important that the department's doing that work now, and they're analysing best practice, as we've heard, worldwide, to look at what they can bring forward to make sure that our laws here are as strong as they possibly can be.
Yeah, members are content with that, yeah. Okay, the other thing I think that stood out was the Regional Disability Forum.
Yes, very much.
And I think, again, similar, right to ask the department what's happened with it, and also to make it very clear that we believe that that is a priority and would both be an asset to the department as well as a very active forum in advising the Department for Communities, indeed many other departments, around disability actions and potential that is there to work in a much better way. Yes, members content with that, and then I'll come to Kelly. Yes, Kelly?
I was just going to say I am a bit concerned that there is no intention or perceived intention for the department to reconvene the disability groups that they had spoke to with regards to the disability strategy, and I think the point is well made about co-production and co-design, that final strategy should be put before that group 100%. As a draft beforehand. It was just to ask the department, will they be doing that? And the other one is, in order to help the committee here, it was mentioned about how the different legislation is treated across the UK, Ireland and elsewhere on disability laws. I'm just wondering, should we ask Reyes maybe for a comparison paper of the legislation that is in different areas? It's not obviously giving opinions on it, but it's just to see what the comparison is with the legislation. I think that would help us.
Absolutely. I think
similar to what they've done with the house sales scheme was very good the way it was laid out.
Just to state, we have made that very clear previously to the department around the engagement, and I think we reiterate it now today on the back of this, but that has been our position for a long time, that should happen.
That's the final one then. Can we make a recommendation to you how critically important that there needs to be within the strategy?
Oversight.
There is an oversight, and I'd like to see a model within that plan and a terms of reference to take it forward in relation to oversight, review, etc. It needs to be a rolling process.
Right, Ciara, I'm really concerned about this.
I'm assuming it's
because-
going to be in it, but we're recommending that it needs to be.
But it's oversight of the strategy as it impacts the whole of the executive.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, members, content, very good. I think that was a very worthwhile session, I have to say. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Moving on then, members, to I'll just check with the clerk that you have all the detail you
I've got
need.
it now, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Now, before I rush on. Okay, thank you, everyone. Agenda item 8 then is SR 189/2024, the Social Fund Winter Fuel Payment Amendment Regulations NI 2024, and they're at page 305. So members, we considered the SL1 at our last meeting on 7 November, and we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. You will remember the rule is to amend several errors in the original rule that was considered by the committee. Have members any objection to the rule? No, thank you. Members, then, can I put the following question formally, that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 189/2024, the Social Fund Winter Fuel Payment Amendment Regulations NI 2024, and have no objection to the rule. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 9 then on our agenda, members, is welfare reform mitigations and consideration of committee motion. So members will recall that we discussed last week, and we've asked the clerk to draft a potential committee motion for discussion around that, and you have that in your papers there at page 312, I think, yeah.
There's a cover memo at 312 and the motion is at 316.
316, thank you.
Motion.
So members, the motion is there. So any comments or proposed changes to the motion? Sian?
Yeah, I just have a couple of changes, just where it says that this assembly notes with concern, to change that to expresses its concern. It's a very tangential point or a little thing, but for me the other bit is the more important bit is calls on the Minister for Communities to provide urgent assurance that sufficient financial resources will be allocated to continue existing mitigation payments seamlessly until the end of that sentence, and to replace it with to commit to preserving these payments at no less than their current levels beyond March 2025, and to initiate clear, proactive communication with all current recipients about their entitlement. And then just a final point on the very end to add with a clear timeline for implementation. So just to explain, I think that to provide urgent assurance that sufficient financial resources will be allocated to continue, I think that we just need to strengthen that slightly. For me, that is just a little bit too vague. I would like to have something in it to commit to preserving these payments at no less than their current levels. I think where we are, that's where I think the crux of this is that are we going to see any changes that are going to put people into much more dire situations that they're already in? And the second part of my sentence there, that proactive communication with all current recipients about their entitlement. There are so many people who don't know that they're actually even in receipt of some of these mitigation payments. And for me, that is a huge worry, that when we get to March 25, if there are any changes, people who don't even know that the benefit cap applies to them or anything like that, that they actually then end up in a much worse situation than they were even prepared for. So that would be the three changes that I'd like with that, and then at the end that with a clear timeline for implementation. I understand when we say that work is happening at pace and think, but we have 4 months. So that clear timeline for implementation for me is an important bit just to add in at the end.
Yeah, any other thoughts, members, before I check with the clerk? Or we might need to give the clerk a wee bit of time to sort of work that proposed change.
Some of the words, but not all of them.
So,
do you want me to send it over to you now?
Well, Brian?
Just in terms of what's covered by the motion, just where it says at point 4, such as bedroom tax and benefit cap, I think it is specifically those two mitigations. Isn't that correct? Is that what's in that 2022?
Yeah, but the review was to look
motion.
at all what else could be added.
Aye, but in terms of what's currently in place, the mitigations are currently in place for bedroom tax and the benefit cap. I know there was other ones like 2-child limit, but that's not
There are-
included.
there-
This-
no,
there
there
are
are-
other ones that have been requested, but just so that we're clear, that's what we're referring to. The ones that are currently in place is the bedroom tax and the benefit cap.
The bedroom tax has been legislated for. It's really the benefits cap is really
Yeah,
the
there's
biggest.
no sunset clause on the bedroom tax, so it isn't really in play as such. It is
cap.
the benefit cap.
Yeah.
And the benefit cap here impacts particularly larger families and
Yeah.
quite a few.
2,500
Yeah.
impacts on people.
Quite a few.
To be
So
honest, it doesn't consider the Northern Ireland population and how we have families here. So
I think that's a key.
Totally.
So listen, I in broad terms, I'd be inclined to agree with that amendment, but I think we will need to give the clerk maybe a few minutes to pull it together to read back to us. So if with members' agreement, we'll maybe close for a minute or two, suspend, allow the clerk to do that.
Have it now. Thank
You do have it, yeah?
Yeah.
So are you happy
I've
to?
highlighted the bits that have changed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just that sentence in the middle.
Yeah.
So will you then read into the wording, please, clerk?
So the draft motion for the committee would be that this assembly expresses its concern at the impending March 2025 deadline for the review of welfare supplementary payments under the Welfare Supplementary Payments brackets Amendment bracket Act brackets Northern Ireland brackets 2022, recognises the vital role that these mitigation payments play in supporting vulnerable individuals and families affected by welfare reforms, and calls on the Minister for Communities to commit to preserving these payments at no less than their current levels beyond March 2025, and to initiate clear, proactive communication with all current recipients about their entitlement, and further urges the Minister to prioritise legislative planning and coordination with the Executive to secure robust, long-term mitigation protections for those most adversely impacted by welfare reform, with a clear timeline for implementation.
Yep, be content with that. Members content?
Can you just clarify, what was taken out then? Because I
So
realised
in
you
the
were
middle
reading.
of the paragraph.
There was a bit taken out then. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the middle of the paragraph,
After
upon
Minister
Minister
for
for Communities
Yes.
is removed from provide to the end of that sentence, which finished enacted,
Okay.
and that is replaced with to commit to preserving these payments at no less than their current levels beyond March 2025, and to initiate clear, proactive communication with all current recipients about their entitlement. And then the remainder of the draft is the same until the last few words were added with a clear timeline for implementation.
Okay, thank you.
Is that okay?
So members content? Yeah.
Agreed?
Okay. Agreed, members?
Agreed.
So we'll
as
ask the clerk to go ahead and check with the business committee around getting that motion.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. Final agenda item, I think, is agenda item 12, clerk? Forward work programme there at agenda item 10.
Yeah.
So if members could please indicate a copy of the forward work programme is there at page 318. I know we have discussed potentially getting the Cliff Edge Coalition in on the 5th of December, and that can be worked in. Are members otherwise content, or any comment in relation to forward work at this point?
can I just say next week we have Nick Fit in who weren't able to make the previous meeting. It would be useful to ask them, when they do come, why they chose not to come to see us.
Okay. Members otherwise content with the forward work programme? Thank you. And any agenda item 11 is any other business. Do members have any other business today? No, thank you. So now we're at agenda item 12, which is date, time and location of the next meeting. And our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 21st of November 2024 in room 29 in Parliament Buildings. And the meeting is now adjourned. And I'll ask the committee to take us out of broadcasting.
Committee Room 29, Sound.